Okay, great. Well, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Kate Greasley and I'm a fellow and tutor in law at Hertford College, Oxford. And I'm here today with Dr. Aruna Nair, who is also a fellow and tutor in law. Dr. Nair teaches trusts law and property law at Hertford College, Oxford, and I teach criminal law, jurisprudence, which is the philosophy of law, and medical law and ethics. So in lieu of a proper open day, since we can't get people actually into Hertford College this year, we're going to have a little discussion with two of our just about former students, two students, Millie and Joe, who've just finished their finals. Congratulations to you guys. Hopefully it all went well. And they're going to put some questions to us about what it's like to study law at Hertford College, Oxford, maybe some questions that they might have been interested to ask when they were thinking about applying to study law here. So I'm going to pass it over to them and we're just going to have a chat led by you guys. So take it away. What would you like to ask?
So maybe when I was applying, I would have been maybe confused about what the difference between Oxford and Cambridge was for law. So why I'd apply to Oxford maybe over Cambridge.
Well, Oxford's much better, obviously. That's the answer. Oh no, I can't be here to say that. Well, I haven't ever worked or studied at Cambridge, so it's difficult for me to really draw those comparisons. I would imagine that the main content of the courses that you're studying are more or less the same, because with law, it's quite prescriptive, as you guys know, as to what you need to study. You have to study, you know, constitutional law, criminal law, trusts, etc., etc. So in terms of what you will be studying, it will be more or less the same thing. What will be different will be the combination of people that are teaching you, that are giving you tutorials and giving you lectures. Aruna,
I think the only thing I would add to that is that I think obviously Cambridge shares with Oxford the tutorial teaching system, the supervisions, as they like to call them. So I think the only substantive difference that I'm aware of in terms of the law course here and there is in terms of the timing of exams. So my understanding is that Cambridge now does end of year exams each year, whereas, as you are both intimately familiar with, at Oxford you do one set of exams in the first year in your second term, and then you don't have any exams until the final year. I don't know if I would position that as a reason to apply to Oxford rather than Cambridge. I think it has some advantages because although it can be quite stressful to do all your exams in 1 2-week lump, my sense is that you're actually capable of doing much better when you've finished all your law subjects and you've thought about how they relate to each other. And you're also, you know, frankly, a year older than you would have been in the year you were studying the subject. So you do have this quite stressful exam period at the end, but you do also have an opportunity to do really well in those exams because you've had a chance to reflect over a couple of years on some of the subjects that you've studied.
Yeah, I think it's also worth mentioning that some courses are, and increasingly so, moving towards mixed methods of assessment or alternative methods of assessment. So for instance, medical law and ethics, which is a third-year optional subject which I teach, doesn't actually examine by way of a 3-hour closed written exam. The students are allowed to go away and spend a week thinking about 2 questions and typing out their answers to those questions. So the more that these alternative methods of assessment are mixed in, and it seems to be a growing trade, the less intense the examination period will be.
Okay, Joe or Millie, either of you?
And what subjects do you study for a degree and how is it organised?
Sorry, what was the second half?
And how is it organised?
Okay, so in your first year, you will study constitutional law, criminal law, and Roman law. And you will have your initial first year exams in these 3 subjects. So term 1 and term 2, which takes you to the end of March, will be these 3 subjects. You then study contract law and tort law. And in your second year, trusts, which is wills and things. Aruna's going to flinch at that explanation of just wills and things. Property law, land law, legal philosophy, administrative law, which is things like judicial review, human rights cases, and that sort of thing. Then coming into your third year, you take EU law as a compulsory subject, and then you're given a choice of 2 optional subjects to pick from a range of a number. So you have 2 more subjects to then study in your third year, and you choose those. So you can tailor your third year law degree far much more to your own special interests. The first 2 years, it's set in stone what you're studying, but there's more room for doing that, for making choices in your third year.
And in terms of how it's organized, it depends to a large extent on what college you're at and how your tutors have decided to divide up the teaching. So the usual thing will be that you're doing 1 full subject and 1 half subject every term. So for instance, say in your first year, you've got to do criminal law, Roman law, and constitutional law. So it might be that you do all of Roman law in 1 8-week term and half of constitutional law. You then do all of criminal law in the next term and the second half of constitutional law. Or it might be organized some other way. It just depends on the college that you're at and how your tutors have, agreed the teaching among themselves. Mm-hmm. So the tutorial teaching is really the main teaching that you will have for those first 2 years. There will also be lectures that the law faculty runs in all the subjects that are taught on the finals. On the undergraduate course all the way through, and you get to select really when you would benefit from going to lectures. So the term before you've done your tutorials, the term after your tutorials, in parallel with your tutorials, it's sort of up to you how you do that. And then in the third year, teaching methods are a bit more mixed. So Kate, maybe, because I don't teach on any third year jurisprudence, third year options, so maybe I'll hand that back to you.
Yeah, sure. So for the option I teach, which is medical law and ethics, we teach via a combination of seminars, which is kind of a smaller lecture, kind of a hybrid between a lecture and a class, because we might have around about 50 students, let's say, from across all of the colleges who decide to take this option in their third year. So we'll get all of those 50 students into a room together. I will talk to them for a while about something like abortion ethics or the right to die or something like this. And then we'll try to have a discussion between us in that big group. We also teach via tutorials, as is the norm for the non-optional courses in Oxford. So alongside these kind of seminar lecture type things, we'll get students in groups of 2, 3, or 4, and they will see individual tutors for more of an in-depth discussion about certain aspects of the course, usually which revolves around some kind of piece of preparatory work that the students have done, which could be an essay, it could be a prepared presentation is something that I might ask students to do. Sometimes I try to organize a debate between students, say abortion rights for and against, and I give people roles. So there's a wide combination of methods, but that tends to be how options subjects proceed.
I don't know if this is sort of disrupting the format, but I suppose because, Millie and Joe, you've just been through this whole experience, I wonder if you might each want to comment on how you found that experience of having your teaching organized that way, the kind of dynamic between tutorials and lectures, and how you actually planned it out in your 3 years.
I think it worked very well for me because I think I have a certain way of learning. I think if it suits a certain way of learning that you have, it works really well. But you've obviously got to be very aware of what your needs are, whether you need to go to a lecture or like what your priorities are at a certain time, rather than everything being completely structured for you.
And Joe?
Yeah, I really enjoy having the freedom to sort of structure my learning in the best way for me. So, for instance, I'm not particularly fond of lectures, so I won't go to them as often. And that just kind of frees up time for me to get on with my work, which works for me. And I'm really glad that I have that option and that flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, you're left to your own devices to a significant extent. I mean, the tutorials are mandatory, and coming to the tutorials, prepared and with something to say every week is mandatory. But kind of apart from that, everyone is more or less left to just organize their learning in the way that they see fit. So, I mean, that's a big jump up from high school, right? There's absolutely no hand-holding and no direction. In that respect, we just kind of give you reading lists, we prompt you, we argue with you, but other than that, the main kind of grist of the learning has just got to be done by you.
So maybe just how many contact hours are there per week? So obviously you're talking about a lot of different types of learning, but what does this kind of come down to in contact hours, and then I guess preparatory work for the tutorials and things?
Right. So this depends very much on what your particular week is looking like, right? As you guys know, some weeks are going to be heavier than others. So if you're trying to get to a whole load of lectures plus a tutorial in a week, that will amount to it could be up to 8 contact hours in a week. Does that sound familiar to you guys? Does that sound about right? Would you say that would have been a heavy week or a lighter week for you?
I'd say yeah, maybe varies, because obviously in third year we have seminars that are 2 hours rather than 1 hour, and that kind of thing. So everything kind of does vary. It's probably more the preparatory work, I'd say, that it like forms the most of your time. So whether you have like like a couple of lectures, it's not as the most. It doesn't take up the bulk of your time anyway.
Right. So it's not terribly time consuming to go along to a lecture.
Yeah.
It's more preparing for your weekly tutorial that is going to take up, a large chunk of your weekly time. And I would have imagined, although you guys can tell us now you're going to tell us what you actually did. I would imagine that for each tutorial, you would need to be putting in at least 3 to 4 days of fairly solid work, which encompasses both the reading, right, the basic kind of familiarizing yourself with what's going on in this area of the law, the various debates, the various academic literature, and then of course having to prepare something for the tutorial, which would probably be an essay. I would imagine that's probably 4 good days worth of work. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I think if you're doing it early, 4 days sounds kind of right. But of course, if you're time pressed, then there are ways to cut it down slightly. But.
Yes, but not recommended. Yeah, I think what I would add on the contact hours point is that I guess you'd always, for the 2 years, have at least at minimum 1 tutorial each week, and in some weeks, in 4 weeks out of the 8, 2 tutorials. And then I suppose if you're thinking in terms of contact hours, you may also want to think in terms of the intensity of the contact, right? The fact that a tutorial is usually 2 or 3 students, or sometimes 1 student and the tutor, means that you're going to be getting very intense, sort of personalized teaching throughout those 8-week terms.
Yeah, that's right. So for the tutorial, I mean, there's nowhere to hide, right? So you can't switch off and look out the window in a tutorial. But not all of your contact hours will be like that. So if you're in a seminar and a lecture, you can take a bit more of a back seat and just listen to what's said, or if it's a seminar, chip in as and when you feel moved to do so. So yeah, it's the nature of the contact hours are very different.
How does the Oxford workload sort of fit around social life, sports, extracurricular activities?
I mean, I really feel that maybe this is a question that the 2 of you are best placed to answer. It's been a really long time since I attempted the social life as an Oxford student. I'll get back to you. So Millie, do you want to answer this question, and then I'll ask Joe to answer it?
Yeah, no, I definitely think there's enough time for you to pursue whatever you want to pursue outside of your degree. And I think we're very lucky at Oxford, there's so many different opportunities for you to get involved in things, whether it's like college societies, uni societies, or just if you want a social life. Like I've done my training to become a yoga teacher throughout my degree as well. So I've got to sit my exam yet, I haven't started the exam, but like you can balance other stuff alongside your degree like perfectly fine, as long as you manage your time well.
Joe?
Yeah, much the same. obviously there's a lot of work that goes into the degree and you spend a lot of time on that, but I find that also time to hang out with friends. I play rugby in the weekends, I work in the college bar. So it's a busy life, but it's a really good place to be.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is sort of a varying situation as well, right? You probably find that there are periods of the year when it's not quite so easy to be doing things every night or be doing, involved in a lot of clubs, and periods of the year where things are a little bit kind of quieter, sort of ticking along a bit more easily. So again, everyone I think has to work out their own happy medium. If we think you're doing too much extracurricular activities and it's studies, we will let you know that.
So one of the questions we were given on the list is about years abroad and how years abroad work in law, because I think it's probably something not many people know they have the opportunity to do.
Yeah, so if you would like to do a year abroad, you can apply for the Joint Honours degree, which is law with studies in Europe, and apply to go wherever it is in Europe that you want to go, that the course covers. I think it's definitely Spain, Germany, France. Are there other options?
I think,
Netherlands?
yeah, and Italy as well, I think.
And Italy and the Netherlands, yeah. So the thing to do if that's what you'd like to do is apply for the Joint Honours course. Now, in some ways, it can be a little bit more competitive to get onto the Joint Honours course because there are only so many spaces for that particular course, and there are fewer spaces across the university for that course than for the single honours law course. But it won't prejudice you at all for when it comes to studying the single honours course if you do apply for law with studies in Europe. It just means there is a chance that you may be offered to read only straight law and not for the joint degree.
So what are tutorials actually like? What goes on in tutorials?
It really, again, it's quite subject specific. It depends on what the topic is and what you've done in preparation for it. So the very traditional Oxford tutorial is that you've written an essay, you come to the tutorial, you read the essay, and then your tutor and your tutorial partner comment on the argument of the essay. And that builds out into a wider discussion of the subject. That's one model, and some tutors run with it every week. Some tutors sort of mix that in a little bit. And some tutors will organize the tutorial around a kind of broader discussion of the subject without really going into the tutorial essay. But I think what you can expect is to discuss what you've read in a lot of depth and detail, take questions about the reading, how you interpreted the reading and so on, that then builds into a kind of wider discussion of the issues, what you think, where you would situate yourself within the academic debates, whether you're in favor of any kind of law reform or whatever, depending on the area of law. That's the kind of, I think, the broad structure. And then within that framework, I think different tutors will organize their tutorials very differently. And different tutorials will go very differently depending on the students and what their concerns are. I can have a tutorial where the students have found the reading quite tricky, quite technical. And so the tutorial, we spend quite a lot of the time in the tutorial just working out exactly what the law is and how the parts of it fit together. And then we have a little chat about, does it need to be so complicated? Whereas you could have the next tutorial the same day with two other students who actually found the material really straightforward. Might be sort of mostly about law reform, policy implications, how all the parts fit together.
Yeah, so no two tutorials, even on the same topic, are ever really going to be the same. And that's the strength of the tutorial system, is that you're in a very small group, and what goes on and what is said, the nature of the discussion is very much led by what those particular students have read, have thought about, are interested in, their level of understanding. So it's certainly the case that the tutorial can be a place where uncertainty about the reading material or questions can be answered and ironed out. I mean, sometimes we do just sit with people and talk them through something, right, that they're struggling with. But one way or another, students do have to do a lot of talking in the tutorials. That's the model. That's what is intrinsically, valuable about it, is that we don't just talk at you, but we get to hear from you. And although that may sound a little intimidating to people coming from high school where they don't do very much speaking in their classes, you'll be surprised, I think you guys might agree with this, by how normal it becomes very, very quickly. And it's not the kind of format where if you say something wrong or if you say something that people don't agree with, people are going to laugh at you or kind of, tell you that's silly. It's not like that at all. It's all very kind of low stakes, friendly, but it's a chance for tutors to hear what you actually have to say about something.
So given that the tutorial system is so personal, what do you look for in an application from someone when they apply to Hartford?
Who wants to go first? For me, the most important thing is the evidence of a really sound work ethic, above absolutely everything else, because that, for any student, is going to be the bedrock of doing well on the degree. So what is evidence of that? Most importantly, I would say predicted grades and the grades that the student has achieved, the candidate has achieved so far in school and what they're predicted to achieve. I mean, we have other things as well. We do have aptitude tests and things like that. They can come into it, but I would say, this is kind of my personal view, but I would say to a lesser extent than predicted grades. But what we really want to see is, is this a person who is serious about studying and is intellectually ambitious, far more so than looking for something like polish or panache or originality, whatever the hell these things are actually supposed to mean, because I don't know. But no amount of kind of polish will get you through a law degree if you can't spend 6 hours in a day sat reading something. So that's what I am primarily looking for: evidence of conscientiousness and work ethic.
Yeah, so I agree. I think the learning curve between school and university is quite steep anywhere, but particularly with the Oxford model, because of the amount of freedom that you have to organize your time and the intensity of those 8-week terms, the amount of work, the amount of reading we expect you to get through. It's very difficult for someone, I think, who hasn't already got an established pattern of work and who doesn't enjoy learning, right? Who isn't sort of excited by the prospect of spending 4 hours really, really understanding some obscure point of trust law. Well, maybe not that, but more broadly, just really interested in learning and willing to make it a priority. It's sort of not something that we can teach once you come here, because there's so much else to teach. And so I think that work ethic, conscientiousness is a kind of baseline for everything else. I think other than that, what you would be looking for is somebody who would benefit from the tutorial system. So somebody who is quite receptive to questions, who can think aloud in a kind of transparent way. So as Kate says, I don't think being polished and confident and being able to sound really good in an interview is relevant, because you can sound really good in a tutorial and still not gain that much from it. Right? Whereas I think if you're good at really responding to what the person you're talking to is saying and thinking about it, changing your mind, taking in other points of view, being really flexible, I think those are the characteristics that we'd be looking for in the interview, kind of above and beyond the record of academic achievement, which is absolutely essential as well.
Yeah.
So what is the interview process itself like?
It's very tiring for us. No, so what will happen the way we do interviews is each candidate will have 2 interviews that are roughly 20 to 25 minutes each. And these are fairly structured. So colleges, every college does things slightly differently. There's a lot of discretion in Oxford when it comes to interviews, but I can tell you what we do. It's not a general chat. It's not sit down and tell us what you're reading at the moment and tell us about your hobbies. What we will do is we will give the candidates some materials to read for maybe half an hour before they come into the interview. And the materials will be something maybe about the law, something from a case, maybe something from statute, something for them to read and think about. And that's all we expect them to do. And the interview will all be structured around what they have read. So we'll start to engage in a discussion with them about what they've read, to essentially hear their views about that and assess, well, how well have they understood what they've read? And what do they think about it, right? What are their responses? Then we'll try to push the interview to consider maybe some wider issues, arguments, principles that come off of the reading and the subject matter, and just have a discussion with them about that. And what we're really trying to do is not get people to recite any correct answers. It's not a quiz, so it's not that the person will be sat there and will be firing questions at them with right or wrong answers, but just to have a discussion about something that they've read and get a bit of a sense of, well, how does this person think? How do they comprehend this material that they've read? What do they make of the arguments that maybe are embedded in what they've read? And what if we try to push them a little bit this way or that? How do they then respond? So that's the basic structure of what our interviews are like. Aruna, do you want to add anything?
No, I don't have anything to add. I think it's essentially, like a mini tutorial, essentially. It's a sort of very, very tiny version of that, where you do a very small bit of reading, as opposed to the week's worth of reading that you would do for your tutorial. And then you come in and you talk about it with the same person who you would end up talking about quite a lot of your reading if you did come onto the course. And it's exactly the same kind of process, where the point is not to come in with a lot of clarity and right answers, but to just be open to exploring what you've read and how other people might think about it.
I think one very important thing to know, if you're a candidate who gets shortlisted for interview, though, is that the interview is not a make or break situation. It's not the case that, as of the point of interview, we select the candidates on the basis of who gave the best interview in our eyes. It's simply one other piece of information to take into account, and the truth is that often it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. And where it does make a difference, it tends to be marginal. So we take the interviews very much with a pinch of salt. We understand that people are nervous, that it's an intimidating situation, and we realize that sometimes actually what you get out of someone in an interview just doesn't really exemplify the best that they can do, because it's a really difficult situation. So we take all of that into account. It's not like, well, you're through this stage and this is the next audition and now you have to pass this, right? Not at all.
So obviously you're talking about giving people, I guess, like legal materials and stuff for their interview. Does it matter if you don't have any legal experience, not legal experience, like legal knowledge or anything prior to applying?
So it doesn't matter at all. There's no knowledge element to either the LNAT, which is the aptitude test beforehand, or the interview. It's all to do with sort of skills, in terms of how you read things, how you understand them, how you think about counter arguments. You don't need to know any law at all.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that the materials that you read don't in any way presuppose legal knowledge or advantage people with legal knowledge. We ensure that.
So what do you look for in personal statements?
Aruna, go ahead.
Personal statements. I mean, again, I think as Kate says, you know, it's kind of a balanced assessment of the entire application.
Yeah.
So again, I don't think anyone should be approaching their personal statement as a kind of make or break. This is what's going to turn the scale on whether I get shortlisted or whether I'm admitted. I think what you would want from a personal statement is, you know, a reasonable explanation of why it is you want to do law. Some evidence of having thought about that. I don't think we need a sort of, you know, a very kind of dramatic picture of how passionate you are about law or about all your extracurriculars and hobbies. It really just needs to be a straightforward description, as clear as you can make it, of why you want to study law, and how you think, you know, you'd be suited to the Oxford degree in particular. So what I would say about personal statements is just not to worry about it too much, and to be as sort of clear and as honest as you can. So I think there's very little point trying to produce something that's not very authentic to you, but that you think sounds impressive. So that's not really what we're looking for in that document. We just want to get a sense of the person.
I mean, I personally feel it's actually kind of difficult to glean all that much about a candidate from the personal statement, because you're so aware that what you're really reading is a representation of what that candidate thinks you want to see. So we're kind of aware of that, and for that reason, you know, as Aruna is saying, I wouldn't ascribe personal statements the greatest amount of weight. And the only advice I would give is, yeah, try to sound authentic. You know, I would rather get a genuine sense of who is this person, right? What is this person like, even if it's not necessarily all about law, than hear this sort of, you know, the very perfunctory personal statement, paragraph by paragraph, about work experience and this and that. I would rather get a sense of the actual person, if I'm honest.
You know, I wonder if the two, because again, you and Joe are so much closer to this process than Kate and I are. If you did have any advice for applicants, and I guess for successful applicants, for how to get the most out of your 3 years, if you do get on the course, maybe we could hear from each of you on that and finish on that note.
I think I agree with what you were saying earlier, that the most important thing is basically a work ethic and a willingness to learn. I don't think it matters how clever you are unless you're going to sit there for however many hours a day and you're, well, not happy to sit there, but willing to sit there and can I just get on with work. And I think if you are that kind of person, then you can do really, really well at Oxford. And for that kind of person, Oxford is the best place to be.
And I think make the most of all the opportunities that there are at Oxford. We're very, very fortunate, or we were very fortunate, that there's so many opportunities. So I had dinner with a student who went to Hertford called Lord Panic. Kate and Aruna were there too. But there was like 15 of us or something at a table, and I don't think you'd anywhere else get that kind of experience. It was so lucky. So I think just take advantage of as many things as you can.
Great. Okay, well, thanks very much, guys. I think we'll end it there then, and just say to everyone who's watching, thanks for watching. We hope it was useful.
Thank you.